So in last week's episode, we talked about arrays in Kotlin and how in an array you can store basically a group of aliens as variables inside this array of object here. And we talked a little bit about how we can then access them via this 0 and this 1. The 0 telling us that we can get to Bob, and the 1 showing us how we get to John. And this was because programmers a long time ago decided that basically they wanted to start counting from 0. So you might think that this 1 in here instead of a 0 would work, but actually that'll give you the second item in the array, or second alien named John. This week we're going to actually talk a little bit about, instead of arrays, we're going to talk more about lists and how lists allow you to do certain things that arrays can't do. So one of the problems with arrays is that when you create an array, you can't add any new items to it. And the reason for that is that an array, going back to our example of storing our aliens in these boxes in computer memory, since computer memory is basically a linear set of boxes that you can store things in, you end up with the problem of putting, in this case, 2 aliens in 2 boxes and not being able to create that longer set of boxes to extend that array, to make it larger. And that's because, due to the nature of how arrays are, you have to find the first item in the array, know where that lives, in which box in computer memory, and then actually have to figure out how many boxes you're using in that array. And you just go to the next one and the next one. So you basically say, oh yeah, the item in the array is at, say, box number 1. Bob in this case, and then you go to item number 2, which is John, and you know that's item number 2 and how to get there because you just know that you go to the next box in memory. But again, this doesn't let you actually add new items to the array, which is kind of limiting. If we want to add new items, let's say Tim to this array, we can't do that. I'm actually going to go over here to the REPL, which we also talked about last week. And in the REPL, we're going to go ahead and try something different here. So originally we had a variable going back to this original sample we had. So if I take this var aliens equals array of, etc., let's go ahead and run that again. And again, array of is just Kotlin's way of saying, go ahead and create this as an array. We'll put Bob in and we'll put John in, and we can create this, and that's fine. But in Kotlin, if you wanted to add something to this and you had a list instead of an array, you could actually say aliens.add, which tells Kotlin that we want to put a new item into this array. And we could say, let's say Tim. And you'll notice here it tells us we get an error because we can't add to this array. Again, going back to what we had said was the limitation on arrays. So instead of doing this, instead of creating an array of, we create what's called a mutable list of. And all mutable list of means really is that this is a list that we can actually modify. We'll talk about how that list works in a moment here. But if I do this, and I create that, then I rerun this aliens.addTim, now it returns true, which just tells us that it succeeded in adding the item. So if we look at aliens, we now have Bob, John, and Tim. And so with this list, we can actually extend our list of items or list of aliens and actually add new aliens to it instead of being just sort of stuck with the array that we already had. So if we modify our program here, we really just have to change this array of to mutable list of, and we pass in this Bob and Jim. And if we save that, again, we go back to our Kotlin compiler here, and we recompile. Now, I'm going to show you a little trick here. Last week, I showed you how if you run this command, okay, and then we can run java-jar, and we run hello.jar, and it'll print out the values. Instead of having to do these in 2 steps, I just want to show you a nice little trick here on the command line. You can go to the end of this Kotlin compiler command and type a double ampersand, and then we type in java-jar, hello.jar. And what this is doing is this double ampersand says, go ahead and run all of this here, and when that's done running, let's automatically run this here. And so if we do that, we'll see the Kotlin compiler will compile our code and then automatically run it. And the nice thing about that is, as we're going through our examples and you're trying to write Kotlin code, and you just want to quickly see if it works, you can just do that $& java-jar hello.jar, and it will automatically do those 2 steps in one. And just a quick note on that. So if this first command were to fail because we have an error in our code, for example, then the $& will actually get ignored. It will not continue to run the rest. So that's kind of a nice little thing we get for free with this. Okay, so we've got these 2 aliens printing out, but now we want to add another one here. So we'll go back and we'll say aliens.add Tim, and just for good measure, let's add another one. We'll add Sally. And then we'll go ahead and recompile that. So we go back over here and we recompile and rerun this program. And we see that we get those first 2 aliens back. So we added this, but these print lines are actually happening before we do the add. So what we can do is, let's go ahead and grab this print line here, and we'll just add another one down here and another one here. And then we can just change the text to say third alien's name. And don't forget to actually change the aliens identifier. So in this case, we have Bob and Jan, which are 0 and 1. We're going to go to the next one, which is 2. And the next one down here is going to be 3. And of course, we need to change our second alien's name here to fourth alien's name. And we'll save that. And now if we go back to our Kotlin compiler and we run that command again, now we have the first, second, third, and fourth aliens' names printing out, showing that our mutable list of in Kotlin actually allowed us to add these additional aliens and then go ahead and access and print them out. Now let's talk about some other things that you can do with lists. So far we've shown how we can add items to a list. So to begin with, we had our var aliens equals mutable list of Bob and John. We created that, and if we type in aliens in the REPL here, we see we have Bob and John. And then we did aliens.add, and we put Tim in here. And then if we type aliens again, we get Bob, John, and Tim. But what if we decided we wanted to remove Tim? So the way we do that is we type aliens.remove at, and we're going to do this parentheses, and inside the parentheses, we're going to put the number that represents the position that Tim is in. So again, going back to the 0 would be Bob, John would be 1, Tim would then be 2. So we put 2 in there, and we hit enter, and it shows us that Tim was at 2, and it also got removed. We can verify that on the REPL by typing aliens. And we see that Bob and John are now in the list instead of Tim. We've added items to the list. We've just done aliens.add, as we did up here, and it would add it to the end of the list. But what if we want to add it somewhere in the middle of the list? Let's say we want, in our aliens list, Bob, Tim, and then John, instead of Bob, John, and Tim. To do that, we can still use the add on aliens. So if we type aliens.add Tim, but instead of saying just Tim inside the add, we can specify the position that we want Tim to show up. Bob is 0, we want Tim to be 1, but John is currently 1. So we just type 1, comma, in here, and that will tell Kotlin that when we add Tim, let's go ahead and add Tim in between Bob and John. And what Kotlin will do is it will keep John, but it will push John forward 1 position. So if we run that and we type aliens again, we now see that Tim has been inserted in between Bob and John. Now, as we showed before, we can do a remove at to get rid of a specific item from this list. Tim in this case, which was the last one. But let's go ahead and show how we can remove Tim from the middle here. So again, we're going to type aliens.remove at, and instead of 2, because it's no longer at the end here, it's in the middle. So here we have Bob, which is 0, Tim is position 1, so we type position 1. And what Kotlin is going to do when we run this is it will go through the list, it'll see that Tim is at position 1, and it's going to remove it. And then it's going to move John back to position 1, giving us the list that we originally started with. So again, it shows that Tim has been removed. And if we type aliens, we can confirm that there's only Bob and John.